Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. We are approaching the power of gods without the wisdom of gods. Daniel Smartenberger has an interesting insight about the state of the world today. And if we look back at the compelling images that the world has presented to us in the last week or so, there was an inspiring image of a Starship rocket launching and then a giant metallic arm catching it back. There's also the image of two nations which should ideally be coming together, which have been coming together, being at loggerheads all of a sudden. And it makes us wonder, if you're looking at making sense of the world today, what is the story of humanity? Do you want to be inspired by this vision of interstellar travel and a global civilization that's going to find new forms of life in extraterrestrial planets? Or are we going to first look at also the fact that we are not able to come together as nations on this planet? If you're not able to come together as nations in this planet, how are we then going to have any life together in any planet that might have a potential for life itself? So this, this is the complexity that not just policymakers, not just public system thinkers, but a student today has to grapple with. Because the world is relentlessly presenting all of this together to you in a single chrome. And that is the challenge when you look at the kind of knowledge that is needed to decode and just simply make sense and live joyfully. And in the last half an hour itself, we've seen a compelling moral and intellectual case for why you need a different episteme. You look at the history of world civilizations and you think of them not just as political marches, but if you look at that as human advancement of knowledge and coming together and collaborating, clearly, like Professor Bolia said, you have a claim as ancient Indian civilization for just continued lived existence together. And that surely has some value to offer to deal with the complexity that the world is presenting to us today. We also heard about the link between language, cognition, and knowledge in Professor Rao's address and why that is fundamental. So there is, there are different ways of making sense, and it appears that the modern institutional structures have not provided an equal seat at the table of conversation on knowledge production itself. So in many ways, when we look at Indian knowledge systems, it is actually a request for knowledge production and the moral sort of compass for the world and global futures together. This is coming to us also when we hear our Honorable External Affairs Minister talk about India's rise and why it will be contested. We are taking a place for a seat at the global table in a very complex environment where, because of the promise that state has been making to the citizens in a global context and its inability sometimes to meet it, we're seeing a polarization of two different kinds. Dr. Balu talks about this in his book. On one side, you see the state becoming more authoritarian and starting to look at technology as a means to control. And on the other side, you look at a radical individual and a sovereign individual. So you have a surveillance state and you have a sovereign individual. Is there a middle way? Is there a middle path that India can show where state, society, sacred can come together? To me, this launch of program is nothing short of a paradigm that we are embarking on to actually bring all of these things together. And I couldn't have had a more stellar panel to discuss this with. And if I just look at the way it is woven together, we are talking about the fundamental means of making the multidiscipline mind that Professor Bolia spoke about. If you're increasing the complexity, you might as well also increase the ability to deal with it. And that is why Indian knowledge system has a moral case. Because as we would discuss and learn from Professor Sampananand Mishra, the fundamental way of pattern recognition using Sanskrit as language and what it does to actually live your life. And how do you then use all of this knowledge for the purpose of joy and well-being that now we will hear from an Ayurvedic perspective. And how does public system, public policy, public leadership become the means for this? And how does technology empower all of this? So energy, ecology, and economy, all of that undergirded by education, and all of that repurposed towards joy. That is the sort of ambition that I'm seeing in this launch. And with that best wishes, and in the true Indian tradition of Sahridayata that Nomeshji had invoked, saying that this is a humble attempt to start a dialogue, I embark on this panel conversation.